My boss thought he could fire me for following his ridiculous new rule to the letter, but the resulting chaos cost the company $500,000 in just 4 hours. I was a senior database administrator for a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago where we managed shipping schedules for over 3,000 retail locations across the country. My manager was a man named Greg who had absolutely no technical background, but had somehow climbed the ladder through sheer office politics and aggressive micromanagement. Greg decided that our database update process was too slow because we insisted on performing rigorous testing before pushing changes to the live environment. He called a mandatory meeting on a Tuesday morning and stood at the front of the room with a smug grin on his face while announcing that all testing protocols were now officially abolished to save time and increase our throughput. He insisted that we simply run the scripts immediately upon creation because he knew more about efficiency than any of us engineers. When I tried to explain that this was a fundamental violation of data integrity and would almost certainly corrupt the shipping manifests, he cut me off mid-sentence and told me to stop being a negative influence on the team. He specifically instructed me to stop wasting company resources on testing and to treat his instructions as the new absolute standard for our department operations. He told me that if I felt the need to verify my work, I could go find another job because his new rule was to be followed without exception or hesitation. I looked him dead in the eye and agreed that I would follow his directive with perfect precision because he was the manager and he clearly understood the consequences of his own policies. I went back to my desk and meticulously wrote the most efficient high-speed script to push the entire logistics database update live without any of our traditional safety checks. The script was beautiful in its simplicity because it removed every single safeguard I had spent 3 years implementing. My coworkers were terrified watching me prepare to deploy this massive update, but I simply told them that I was following management instructions to the letter as I had been ordered. The atmosphere in the office was thick with tension, while Greg paced around behind us constantly checking his watch and urging us to move faster so he could boast about his new efficiency metrics to the executive board. When the clock struck noon, I pressed the enter key to initiate the massive database push. Within seconds, the servers began to scream as the database attempted to map retail inventory to regions that no longer existed in the updated configuration. The system began generating massive errors as it tried to reconcile millions of shipments against the corrupted data structure. Shipping labels were being printed incorrectly across our entire network, and trucks were being dispatched to empty loading docks while retail stores were receiving massive shipments of items they had not ordered. Greg walked by my desk and gave me a thumbs up while asking if I was hitting my speed targets as if the entire system was not currently melting down into a pile of digital waste. I just nodded and kept my hands off the keyboard while watching the error logs flood the screens of every person in the department. Within 20 minutes, our customer support lines began lighting up like Christmas trees as thousands of angry store managers started demanding to know why their entire inventory systems were showing complete nonsense. Greg started shouting from his office asking why the phones were ringing so much, and I calmly stood up and walked over to his doorway. I told him that I was simply following his new order to remove all testing and deploy the updates immediately as he had instructed us to do earlier that morning. He turned pale as he walked over to my monitor and saw the massive scrolling wall of red error messages that indicated a complete system failure. He started screaming at me to fix it, but I calmly reminded him that he had specifically forbidden any testing or safety protocols, and that I was still in the middle of executing his official directive. He scrambled to his phone to call the director of IT, but the director was already walking toward our office after having received dozens of panicked alerts about the total shipping paralysis. The director took one look at the carnage on our screens and ordered an immediate emergency shutdown of the entire logistics network to prevent further data loss. Greg tried to blame me by shouting that I had sabotaged the update, but the director pulled up the official internal communication logs from the earlier meeting. Every single one of my coworkers corroborated that Greg had explicitly ordered us to abandon testing and had threatened to fire anyone who questioned his wisdom. The company had to hire external crisis consultants at triple the normal rate to manually reconstruct the shipping schedules from backup archives that were over 12 hours old. The entire operation remained completely offline for 4 hours during the peak of our daily shipping cycle, which resulted in massive late fees and broken service-level agreements with our biggest retail partners. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal for Greg, because the company was contractually liable for every single hour of downtime. The executive board held an emergency meeting that afternoon to determine who was responsible for such a catastrophic failure of basic operational standards. Greg was summoned to the boardroom, and I could hear his panicked voice through the hallway as he tried to shift the blame onto my technical execution. The director of IT walked out of the boardroom a few minutes later and walked straight over to my desk to ask if I had kept a written record of the meeting instructions. I handed him the printed notes I had taken during Greg's morning lecture, which detailed his exact orders to stop testing and his threats regarding our jobs. The director thanked me and went back into the boardroom to present the evidence to the board members. Greg was escorted out of the building by security less than 20 minutes later, without even being allowed to gather his personal belongings from his desk. The director of IT returned to our department and informed us that all previous testing protocols were being reinstated effective immediately, with the added requirement that they be documented by the database administrator in charge. The new policy also included a formal audit trail for every single directive issued by management to ensure that no such foolishness could ever happen again. My coworkers celebrated the return to normal operations, and we spent the rest of the week carefully fixing the remaining data inconsistencies while enjoying the newfound respect for our technical expertise. The company had to pay out hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties to our clients, but they viewed it as a necessary cost of cleaning out bad management. I kept my job and received a quiet but significant promotion for having the documentation to prove that I was just a diligent employee following orders. The atmosphere in the office changed completely because management finally realized that they could not dictate how a complex database should be managed without understanding the technical realities of the systems. I never had to worry about being micromanaged again because everyone knew that I was the one who kept the digital lights on and the data clean. The story of what happened to Greg became a permanent part of the department lore, and every new hire was told about the day the warehouse shut down because of a foolish boss who thought he was smarter than the engineers. It was the most satisfying moment of my entire career, because I had watched a man lose his position purely through his own arrogance and his complete disregard for the expertise of the people he was supposed to lead. I went back to my work feeling proud of what I had accomplished and looking forward to every single day I spent at that office after the air had been cleared. I had done my job perfectly by following every instruction and letting the logic of the system teach the lesson that the manager was unable to learn on his own. The best part was knowing that I had stayed perfectly within the legal requirements of my employment contract while ensuring that the villain lost everything because of his own bad decisions. Justice had been served with surgical precision, and the entire company was better off for it in the long run. I left the office on Friday afternoon with a smile on my face because I knew that even in a giant corporate machine, an individual can still stand up for logic against incompetence and emerge victorious. It was a perfect ending to a chaotic week, and I walked out of those glass doors knowing that I was the one in control of my own professional fate. I was ready for whatever challenge came next because I knew that I could handle any amount of stress as long as I kept doing the work the right way and keeping my own records to protect my position. The truth is always the best defense, and in this case it was also the ultimate weapon against a toxic manager. I enjoyed my weekend more than any other time in my life because the weight of that bad management was finally off my shoulders and the future looked bright again. Everything returned to normal, and the systems ran smoother than ever before. I am still here at my desk doing the work I love and protecting the integrity of the data every single day, while the memory of that afternoon continues to serve as a reminder that arrogance always has a price. It was a wild ride that I will never forget as long as I live in the city of Chicago, where I still work and thrive to this very day. I never regret taking that stance because it was the only way to save the company from a total collapse. Sometimes the best way to prove a point is to simply let the system speak for itself and stand back to watch the results unfold exactly as expected. Everything is perfect.